Good evening, and welcome. Wherever you are listening from tonight, you are safe here. Tonight, we walk beneath the ancient trees of Mirkwood, following the quiet steps of a woodland prince. Before we begin, if these calm journeys through myth and legend help you rest, you are always welcome to stay. And if you choose to subscribe, you will never miss another quiet story beneath the stars. Now, take a slow breath. Let the world grow distant, and let us begin. Long before the War of the Ring stirred the wide lands of Middle-earth, before the horns of Helm's Deep or the cries upon the Pelennor fields, there stood in the north a forest older than kingdoms of men. It had once been called Greenwood the Great, but in those days, it was known as Mirkwood. The trees still rose as they always had, tall and patient, their roots deep in the memory of Arda. Yet their leaves whispered differently now. Where once there had been only song and sunlit laughter, there lingered a hush beneath the canopy, as though the forest itself listened for something that moved far to the south. Moonlight filtered through tangled boughs in pale silver strands. It touched bark darkened by age and shadow. It traced the slow current of the forest river as it wound quietly between moss-covered stones. Owls called in the high branches, their voices low and measured, echoing softly across the sleeping wood. In the northern reaches of that vast forest, where the shadow was thinner and the air yet sweet, there lay the hidden realm of the woodland elves. No great white towers rose there, no shining cities of marble. Instead, their halls were carved deep beneath the earth, woven into the living roots of ancient trees. Stone doors stood concealed by vine and branch. Lanterns of soft golden light glowed within caverns shaped by patient craft, reflecting gently upon flowing water that sang beneath the halls. It was a realm both secret and enduring. There ruled the Elven king, Thranduil, son of Orifer, lord of the Sylvan folk and of cinder and blood. His crown bore no heavy jewels in those quiet days, yet his presence carried the weight of long memory, of battles fought beneath darker skies, of the last alliance, of losses that did not fade with time. And within those halls walked his son, young by the measure of the Eldar, though already older than the kingdoms of many men, was Legolas, prince of the woodland realm. He moved lightly beneath the trees, as though the forest itself had shaped him from wind and leaf. His hair caught the moonlight like pale gold against the darker wood, and his keen eyes saw further than mortal sight could reach. In those days, his steps were not yet burdened by the long roads of the world. He walked often at twilight, when the sky turned deep blue and the first stars kindled above the canopy. He would leave the stone-lit corridors of his father's halls and ascend narrow paths known only to the woodland folk, climbing through living branches until he stood high among the boughs. From there, he would watch the forest breathe. The northern wood remained fair. Deer moved in cautious grace between trunks. The river shimmered softly in starlight. Lanterns glowed faintly where elves kept watch along hidden paths. Quiet music drifted sometimes from distant clearings. Heartstrings touched lightly, voices rising in gentle harmony, older than sorrow. Yet even there in the safer reaches, the forest was not as it had once been. Far to the south stood the hill of Dol Guldur. Though its master was not openly named in those years, his presence lay upon the land like frost that never fully melted. Birds flew wide of its shadow. leaves brown too early in its southern slopes. Spiders, large and fell, spun their webs in deep glades where light struggled to enter. Legolas had not yet walked so far south alone, but he felt it. Elves perceive more than sight reveals. The tremor of distant corruption, the thinning of birdsong in certain winds, these were whispers carried through root and branch. The forest spoke always, though its voice was subtle. Often he would pause, one hand resting upon the bark of an oak older than Numenor's Val, and listen, not with ears alone, but with the quiet awareness of one born to immortal lands. The woodland elves did not abandon their joy because of shadow. In the great cavern halls, soft lantern light illuminated carved pillars shaped like entwined trunks. Water flowed in narrow channels through polished stone, reflecting gold and amber upon the ceilings above. Tables of smooth wood were laid with fruits gathered from hidden orchards, breads sweetened with forest honey, and clear wine stored in cool chambers beneath the earth. Music echoed there without urgency. Voices rose in layered song, not in lament, but in remembrance of starlit ages long past. Laughter, though quieter than in ancient greenwood, still found its place beneath the roots of trees. Legolas would sit sometimes beside elder elves who had seen the light of Valinor only in memory or tale. They spoke softly of distant coasts, of the sea, whose call stirred faintly, even in the depths of Mirkwood. Their words were not heavy with regret, but woven with longing that stretched like the western horizon. He listened more than he spoke, for though he was a prince, he was also a student of the forest. In daylight hours, he trained with bow and arrow in shaded clearings where targets were set among tree trunks. His arrows flew swift and true, guided by eyes that missed little and hands steady as river stone. The woodland bow was light yet strong, shaped for movement through dense growth rather than open field. He learned to move without breaking twig or stirring leaf. He learned to step upon moss rather than dry bog. He learned to breathe with the rhythm of wind through branches. Yet even in practice, there was calm. Training among the woodland elves was not driven by harsh command. It was refinement, patience, the understanding that skill grew like a tree, slowly rooted deep. At night, when Control slipped silently through the forest path, Legolas would sometimes follow at a distance, not yet a full member among them, but no longer a child confined to halls. Cloaked in green and brown, the elves moved like thoughts between trunks. They spoke rarely, communicating by gesture and glance. They watched for spiders' webs strung between branches where none had been before. They marked places where the air felt wrong, heavy and unmoving. They noted where birds did not sing. The darkness in Mirkwood was not constant. It gathered. It waited. And so did they. Above it all, the stars remained unchanged. High beyond the canopy, beyond the slow turning of shadow and rumor, the heavens burned clear and distant. Legolas would look upward through gaps in leaves and feel the vastness of ages unfolding beyond forest and fear alike. He did not yet know of distant Rivendell, nor of Lothlorien's golden light. He did not yet stand beside dwarves or men. He knew only the forest, its beauty, its danger, its quiet endurance. And beneath the patient gaze of Thranduil, and beneath the soft glow of hidden lanterns carved deep in stone, the young prince of the woodland realm grew in silence, shaped not by war, but by listening. The forest breathed around him, and though shadow lingered in its southern depths, In the north, there remained light enough for hope to take root. In the woodland realm, skill was not pressed upon the young as burden, nor demanded in haste. It unfolded slowly, like fern fronds uncurling beneath filtered light. So it was with Legolas. Though counted young among the Eldar, he had already watched many mortal generations rise and fade beyond the forest's borders. Yet in the reckoning of his own people, he was still learning the deeper ways of leaf and root. His training began not in halls of stone, but beneath open sky. There were clearings known only to the woodland guard, quiet circles where the trees grew wide apart, their trunks pale in slanting morning light. The air there smelled of moss and bark, of wild herbs crushed underfoot. No walls marked the space. The forest itself was boundary enough. Legolas stood among elder wardens, bow in hand. The bow of the woodland elves was slender and supple, shaped from yew grown in shaded groves. It bent with grace rather than force. Its string hummed softly when drawn, like a harp note waiting release. He learned first to stand, feet placed not upon dry leaves, but upon firm girth. Weight balanced so lightly that even the ground scarcely felt him. Breath slow, shoulders at ease. Patience came before speed. An arrow loosed in haste was rarely true. He practiced long before targets were set, drawing the string until muscle remembered the motion without strain, holding aim until arms trembled slightly, then easing the tension rather than forcing release. Elves did not measure skill in bruised fingers or strained backs. They measured it in stillness. When at last he loosed his first arrows toward marked bark, the shafts struck cleanly, not always at the center, but rarely astray. His sight was keen from the first, able to follow the subtle sway of leaf or flicker of movement through undergrowth. Yet his teachers corrected him without rebuke. An arrow must fly not only straight, but quiet. The woodland guard prized silence above all. A snapped twig could betray position more surely than a missed shot, and so Legolas learned to move before he learned to strike. He walked narrow paths between roots that twisted like coiled serpents. He crossed fallen trunks without disturbing lichen or moss. He climbed into branches high above the forest floor, placing hands and feet where bark would not crumble beneath pressure. Often he trained at twilight, when shadows lengthened and the forest shifted its breadth. In that dim light, sight alone could not guide aim. He learned to sense the shape of things, the subtle displacement of air, the faint tremor carried through branch and vine. An owl launching from a limb made less sound than most men would believe. A stag stepping through brush disturbed leaves in patterns different from wolf or spider. The spiders were not yet as bold in the northern reaches, but their presence was known. Silken threads stretched sometimes between trunks in places where none had hung before. The wardens would cut them silently and mark the glade for watch. Legolas saw such webs once at dawn, silvered by mist. They were delicate, almost beautiful in their geometry. Yet beneath that fragile pattern lay hunger. His arrow severed the thread without sound. Training did not end with bowcraft. He learned the silent signals of patrol, the slight tilt of fingers, meaning halt, the shift of palm, meaning danger. He learned to blend cloak and hair with the filtered light. The green and brown garments of the woodland elves were not mere raiment. They were part of the forest's own pattern. In high summer, he moved barefoot, feeling the cool of moss and warmth of sunlit bark alike. In winter, he trod softly upon frost, without leaving heavy print. His father's captains watched without interference. There was pride among them, though seldom spoken. The prince did not demand honor because of blood. He earned place through quiet diligence. Sometimes Thranduil himself observed from a distance, The Elven King's gaze was not stern, but discerning. He had seen the ruin of Orifer beneath the last great war against Sauron. He had led his people through loss and into shadowed safety. In his son, he did not seek reckless valor. He fought endurance. And endurance was learned not in battle alone, but in restraint. There were days when Legolas trained upon the riverbanks, where reeds whispered softly and dragonflies skimmed the surface. He practiced shooting from moving ground, stepping across stones, balancing upon slick surfaces where river water had smoothed rock to glass-like sheen. He learned to fire while turning, loosing arrow without pause in motion, yet even this was done in calm rhythm, never in frantic rush. The woodland style favored precision over fury. As centuries turned slowly, his form grew assured. Arrows struck clean bark in near silence. Birds were startled less often by his passing. Even deer grazing at forest edge would lift their heads and then return to feeding, sensing no threat in his quiet step. Yet the forest itself taught more than any warden. Legolas would rest his palm against ancient trunks and feel the faint pulse within, as if sap carried whispers upward through living wood. He began to sense places where shadow pressed more heavily, not always visible, but perceptible, like a chill in air that had grown still. In those moments, training became something deeper. Not skill for display, but guardianship. The woodland elves did not patrol for conquest. They guarded memory. They preserved glades where song still rose clear. They defended paths where starlight could still touch uncorrupted leaf. Legolas came to understand this without formal lesson. One evening, high among the branches, he drew his bow toward a distant movement. His arrow hovered, string drawn taut. Throughout narrowed leaves, he glimpsed not beast, but spider, large, dark, testing new ground in the safer north. He did not loose immediately. Instead, he watched. The creature moved cautiously, as if uncertain of territory. It had strayed too far from its southern web-laden halls. His arrow flew then, swift and clean. The spider fell without cry. Silence returned. There was no triumph in the act, no cheer, only acknowledgement. The shadow was patient. So must they be. As seasons turned, and Mirkwood deepened in name and rumor, Legolas's skill ripened like fruit kept from frost. He moved through branch and glade with growing certainty, no longer merely a prince in training, but a warden in spirit. And yet, even as his arrows flew true, and his steps left scarcely a mark, there remained gentleness in him. He paused for birdsong. He watched sunlight ripple across leaves after rain. He listened when elder elves spoke of ancient greenwood before Dol Guldur shadow spread like stain through southern groves. Skill did not harden his heart, it steadied it. Thus, beneath towering oaks and whispering beeches, amid lantern glow and river murmur, the young prince of the woodland realm learned not only how to defend his home, but how to belong to it. Beneath the forest floor, where roots of ancient oaks intertwined like woven tapestry, there lay halls shaped not by conquest, but by patience. The woodland realm did not gleam with white stone towers, nor shimmer with crystal spires. Its beauty was subtler, born from scone carved in harmony with earth, rather than imposed upon it. Deep doors of wood and rock, concealed by vine and moss, marked the entrances. To mortal eyes they would seem no more than a shadow beneath hanging leaves. Yet within, corridors opened into chambers wide and softly lit. Lanterns of wrought silver and green glass hung from arching ceilings shaped like branches frozen in motion. Their light was warm, not harsh as torch flame, and it glowed like captured sunset beneath stone. The walls bore carvings of leaves, rivers, and starlight patterns, etched with care over centuries uncounted. Water flowed everywhere. Narrow channels ran along the sides of passageway, fed by the forest river above. Their quiet murmur was constant and soothing, a reminder that even beneath earth, the woodland still breathed. In some holes, water fell gently from ledges into clear pools where fish swam in slow, untroubled circles. It was here that Legolas often walked in the early hours before dusk. The coolness beneath the earth differed from the shaded air above. It carried a stillness that felt timeless. Footsteps echoed only faintly, for the floors were smoothed by long use and crafted to soften sound. Elves passed through the corridors with unhurried grace. Their garments shimmered faintly in lantern light, greens deep as summer leaves, silvers pale as moonlit bark. Conversation, when it rose, did so in soft tones, like wind through distant branches. There were feasting halls carved broad and high, their ceilings supported by pillars shaped like living trunks. Long tables of polished wood stood there, laid not in excess but in elegance. Fruits gathered from hidden clearings were arranged in careful abundance. Berries dark as night, apples with skins flushed gold and crimson, bread warmed from underground ovens scented with forest herbs. Wine flowed in slender cups, clear and fragrant. Music was never absent. Sometimes a harp would sound from the side chamber, its strings touched lightly, each note carrying through the stone corridors like ripples through still water. At other times, voices rose in layered harmony, singing songs older than the shadow that now lay upon Mirkwood's southern reaches. These were not songs of sorrow alone. They remembered starlit ages beside Cuiviénen, though few present had seen those distant waters. They were called Greenwood before its name had changed. They honored fallen kin without despair. Immortality did not dull a memory. It deepened it. Legolas would sit upon smooth benches carved along the walls, listening. His eyes, bright in lantern glow, followed the movement of musicians' hands, the subtle shifts of breath before a note began. He did not yet sing with the fullness of elders, but his voice joined when called, clear and light. The Elven King's throne stood not upon a raised dais of grandeur, but at the head of the largest hall, carved from stone shaped like interwoven branches. Behind it hung a tapestry depicting leaves under starlight, not embroidered with gaudy thread, but woven in subtle shades of silver and green. There sat Thranduil. His crown was wrought of forest leaves, fashioned in silver, set with small gems that caught lantern light like dew at dawn. His bearing was straight, though centuries weighed upon him. His eyes, keen and distant, held both the brightness of youth long past and the shadow of wars remembered. He did not speak often in open hall. When he did, silence gathered naturally. Legolas would stand beside the pillars at such times, observing. He watched how his father's words carried calm authority rather than force, how decisions were shaped not in haste, but with careful regard for what must endure. In quieter hours, the prince would wander into chambers set aside for craft. There, Elves shaped arrowheads with delicate precision, polished blades with care, and wove cloaks light as spider silk, yet strong against thorn and branch. Even such work was done without urgency. Tools rested in skilled hands that had practiced their art for centuries. The scent of wood shavings mingled with cool stone. Elsewhere, scribes tended to scrolls, records of patrol routes, songs newly composed, accounts of distant travelers who had passed near the woodland's edge. The script flowed elegant and measured, each letter formed as if shaped by wind rather than hand. Legolas would trace such script with gentle fingers, learning not only words but lineage. For though the woodland realm seemed removed from the affairs of distant lands, it was not blind to them. Messengers from Rivendell came at long intervals. Rumors of stirrings in the south were weighed carefully. News of strange movements near Dol Guldur was recorded without panic. The halls did not echo with fear. They echoed with vigilance. At times deep within the caverns, Legolas would find himself alone beside a quiet pool where lantern light shimmered upon its surface. There he would kneel and watch reflections dance, his own face mingled with silver glow and faint ripples from falling water. Immortality stretched before him like the endless corridors of stone. Yet even in that long road, there were seasons of change. He sensed that the shadow pressing in Mirkwood's southern edge would not remain distant forever. Though the halls felt safe and the songs rose pure, the forest above bore signs of strain. The spiders grew bolder each passing decade. The birds altered their flight paths. The wind from the south carried faint bitterness. And so the halls were not refuge alone. They were heart, a place from which strength flowed outward, as the river flowed from hidden springs beneath stone. When feasts ended and lanterns dimmed toward night, Legolas would ascend once more toward the forest floor. The transition from warm golden light to cool moonlit air always felt like crossing between worlds. Above, the trees waited. Below, the halls endured. Both were home, and within their quiet chambers, beneath roots and flowing water, the young prince learned that guardianship was not only the drawing of bowstring in darkness, but the preserving of light where it still glowed gently against stone. In those days, the forest river ran still clear in the north, though its waters were dimmed beneath the heavy boughs, and seldom did the sun look straight upon it. It came down out of the far hills, cold and swift in spring, but in summer it moved with a deep and measured murmur, as if it remembered songs that stones had heard when the world was younger. Along its banks, the moss lay thick, and reeds whispered softly, and there were pools dark as polished jet, where stars were mirrored when the night was fair. Often Legolas walked beside that river when the labor of the day was ended, and the lanterns were kindled in the hidden halls. He went lightly, as one born to the wood, and his feet made little sound upon leaf and loam. Sometimes he bore his bow unstrung upon his shoulder, as hunters do in peace. Sometimes he carried no weapon, and only a small knife for the cutting of cord or bread. For in the northern glades, the peril was not ever at hand, and the river path was watched by many eyes. Yet though he walked alone, he was not solitary. The forest was about him, and to the Eldar, the trees were not as the silent things that men deem them. The old oaks stood like guardians set in patience, their limbs lifted high as if to bear up the roof of the world. Beeches rose smooth and pale, catching what moonlight could fall between the leaves. Pines in shadowed ranks breathed a resin-sweet air, and their needles made a soft rain when a squirrel leapt among them. All these things spoke in their own manner, not with voices of tongue, but with the slow counsel of being that only the long-lived can truly heed. So Legolas listened as he went. He learned to mark the changes that came not in days but in years. The creeping of ivy upon stone, the widening of a root that pressed a path aside, the shifting of a sandbar in the river's bend after a winter flood. Such changes were little to behold, yet they were the footsteps of time. And to an elf, time is both friend and burden, for it brings beauty to fullness, yet it carries away all that is unguarded. At a turn of the river, there was a fallen tree, thrown down in some storm long past. Its trunk lay half in water, half upon the bank, and in its hollow had grown a small garden of ferns. There Legolas would often pause. He would sit upon the smooth bark, warmed in the day and cool at evening, and look upon the flowing water. The river did not hasten, nor did it linger, but went on, taking what was given, bearing what it must. In that unceasing going, he found a likeness to the life of the Eldar, who endure while the world changes about them. Yet unlike the river, they remember. Memory was the treasure of his people, and also their wound. In the woodland realm, songs were sung of greenwood as it had been, when the leaves were brighter and the light more clean, and when the shadow of Dol Guldur was but a rumor carried by wandering beasts. The Eldar of the wood were not ignorant of darkness, for they had heard of Morgoth in elder tales, and some among them had fought in the great wars beyond Beleriand. Yet for long years after those tumults, the forest had been fair, and the hearts of the sylvan folk were merry. Now the name Mirkwood was spoken without wonder, and with less laughter. It was not that all the forest was black. Rather, there was a taint in the south, like smoke that cannot be seen, yet is tasted on the tongue. In certain winds, the air grew close and bitter. In some nights, the stars seemed more distant, as if a veil were drawn between earth and sky. Even the river, that ancient traveler, ran under the canopy with a sound that could be heard as lament by those who were inclined to listen. Legolas did not yet know all the counsels of the great, nor the secret tidings that passed at times between Thranduil and the messengers of Imladris. But he felt the change in small signs. Deer did not come so far south as they once had done. Birds gathered in the northern branches and would not cross certain stretches of wood, as if an unseen wall stood there. At times, he found webs in places where no spider of the common sort would choose to spin, and the silk was thick and foul to the touch. One evening, as he walked, he heard an owl call from a high branch, and then fall silent in mid-cry. He halted at once, and the river's murmur seemed to swell. He looked up, and though he saw no wing nor shadow, he felt a brief tightening in the air, like a breath held. Then all was as before, save that the forest had become a little more watchful, and the hair at his neck stirred without wind. He went on, but more slowly. Presently you came to a place where the bank fell away and the river widened. There the water moved deep and dark, and upon its surface drifted pale leaves, turning in gentle circles. Above, the boughs were thicker, and the moonlight came only in broken shards. It was fair, and yet it was also strange, for in that dimness shapes seemed to linger at the edge of sight, not seen, but suspected. Then Legolas took out a small stone from his pouch, white and smooth, and cast it into the water. The splash was soft, and the ripples ran outward until they touched the bank and returned. He watched them meet and fade. The water accepted the stone without question and bore it down into darkness, where it would lie among others and be forgotten by all save the river. So too, he thought, might the deeds of the elder be borne away if they ceased to guard the places they loved. Yet he did not fall into despair for such was not his kind. The elder are slow to wrath, but they are slower still to surrender. The beauty of the forest, though dimmed, remained, and in the north the green still lived. The river still ran. The lanterns still glowed in halls beneath the roots. Harps were still strung, and songs were still remembered. These were not small things. Before he reached the ways that led down to the doors, he would sometimes turn aside to a little rise where the river could be seen again through the trees. There he could hear, very faint, the call of a horn from some far watchpost, answered by another, and then all would sink back into the ordinary sounds of the wood. Such signals were seldom needed in the northern marches, yet they were kept, for the elder forget nothing of war, even in their peace. In those moments, Legolas would think of the long leagues between this quiet water and the dark hill in the south. He could not see Dol Guldur, nor did he desire to, yet its shadow lay in the tails of the wardens, and in the wary way that all looked southward when the wind came ill-scented. Thus he learned that vigilance is not fear, but love that will not sleep nor yield to forgetfulness ever. And so the forest river flowed on beside him, bearing the memory of ancient rains and the promise of those yet to come. And in its unhurried song, he learned patience, which is the strength of the elder and the comfort of those who keep watch through many nights. It was in a season when the nights had grown longer, though winter had not yet laid its frost upon the forest, that Legolas was first summoned to walk openly among the wardens of the woodland realm. The call was not made in ceremony. No horn was blown within the halls, nor were banners raised. A captain of the guard came quietly to where Legolas stood near the river gate, and by a simple inclination of the head conveyed what was needed. The prince understood. He armed himself without haste. His bow he strung carefully, testing the cord with practiced hand. A quiver of pale-fledged arrows he slung across his back. His knives he secured at belt and boot. Over his tunic of forest green, he drew a cloak of soft gray, light as woven mist, which in moonlight would take the hue of bark and branch alike when he stepped beyond the hidden doors and into the night air. The forest received him without greeting, as it received all who entered in watchfulness. The moon rode high, pale and veiled at times by slow drifting cloud. Its light filtered through layered leaves, falling in shifting patterns upon moss and root. The air held the coolness that comes before frost, and the scent of pine and distant water lay faint upon the breeze. Around him moved the wardens. They spoke no word. Their forms passed between trunks like thoughts, appearing and vanishing with little more sound than breath. Some took to the higher paths among branches. Others remained upon the forest floor. Each knew his place in the pattern, and each trusted the others, without need of speech. Legolas fell into their rhythm. There was no signal marking his acceptance, no gesture of welcome. The watch itself was acknowledgement enough. They moved north and east at first, along paths seldom trodden by mortal foot. The ground there rose and dipped gently, crossed by roots thick as serpents, and strewn with fallen leaves that would betray careless step. Yet none among them disturbed so much as a twig. Time passed without measure. The forest in such hours does not feel the passing of moments as men do. Instead, there is a deepening of shadow, of stillness, of listening. An owl called once, and was answered. Far off, a fox barked sharply, then ceased. Legolas let his senses widen. He felt the air brush lightly across his cheek and noted its direction. He heard the faint scrape of bark as a squirrel shifted in sleep. He marked where insects hummed and where they did not. They came at length to a region where the trees grew thicker, their branches entwined overhead so that moonlight fell only in narrow shafts. Here the air was heavier, not foul, but weighted. One of the wardens raised a hand. They halted. Ahead, between two leaning drunks, hung a thread, silver in moonlight, fine as hair, yet strong enough to catch dew without breaking. Legolas saw it and felt the slight tightening in his chest that comes not from fear, but from recognition. The spiders had ventured farther north. No great nest loomed nearby. No massed webs draped in glades as in the darker south. This was a scout's thread, a testing of boundaries. A warden nearest the silk drew a small blade and cut it silently. The strand curled and fell without sound. Yet such threads are not placed without watcher. The patrol spread in a slow arc, fanning outward. Legolas climbed without thought into a low branch, then higher until he stood above the path. From that vantage he scanned the shadowed spaces between trunks. There, a movement. Subtle. A dark shape against darker bark. He did not rush his aim. He drew his bow with steady breath, feeling the strings settle into familiar tension. His arrow waited in quiet readiness. The spider descended along another line, slow and deliberate. Its legs were long and jointed, its body thick and dull in the moonlight. It was not among the greatest of its kind. It was large enough to trouble a stag. Legolas loosed. The arrow flew clean and struck true. The creature fell without cry, its form striking leaf litter below with a mugen thud. Two wardens approached at once and dispatched it fully. Silence returned. There was no cheer, no word of praise. The forest does not applaud survival. The patrol moved on. Deeper into the wood they went, where the air seemed colder, though no wind stirred. Legolas sensed there a different stillness, not the restful hush of sleeping glades, but a pause that felt expectant. He saw no foe, yet he felt that they were observed, not by beast alone. Far to the south, beyond leagues of darkened wood, rose the hill of Dol Guldur. Though its towers could not be glimpsed from these northern reaches, its presence lay like a distant pressure upon the land. It was not a thing that spoke in voice, nor moved in visible form, yet its shadow lengthened with passing years. The wardens did not speak of it as they walked, but they all knew. Legolas knew as well. For though young by the measure of the Eldar, he had heard enough of the necromancer to understand that Mirkwood's darkness was not born of spiders alone. They turned at last toward homeward paths, marking with subtle signs the places where silk had been found. The forest began to feel lighter as they moved northward again, as if tension eased by degrees with each measured step. Before reaching the hidden gates, the patrol paused in a high glade where the trees opened slightly to the sky. The moon shone unobstructed there, pale and watchful. Legolas stood among them, bow unstrung now, and looked upward. Stars glimmered beyond the canopy, remote and constant. In their light, he felt both the vastness of ages and the smallness of a single night's watch. Yet such watches matter, for it is in many small vigils that great shadows are held at bay. At length, the captain inclined his head slightly toward him, not as prince, but as fellow warden. It was enough. Legolas returned beneath the roots as dawn hinted faintly beyond eastern leaves. The lanterns in the halls still glowed softly. Water still flowed in quiet channels. And though the forest bore wounds unseen by many eyes, it also bore guardians who would not abandon it. Thus began his place among the silent watch, not as heir alone, but as one who walked beneath starlight, with bow in hand, keeping faith with tree and river alike. In the years that followed his first full watch among the wardens, Legolas came to know that the forest did not change all at once. Corruption in Mirkwood did not fall like a sudden storm. It gathered, it thickened, it crept root to root, leaf to leaf, in ways so gradual that only those who lingered long in one place could perceive it. The southern reaches had long borne the greater weight of the shadow. There the trees stood closer together, their crowns weaving a roof through which sunlight seldom passed. Moss grew pale and thin upon their trunks, and in certain glades the air seemed unmoving, as though breath itself were reluctant to linger. Legolas had not been permitted to range so far in his earlier centuries, but as his skill and steadiness proved certain, the boundaries of his patrol widened. One autumn evening, he rode southward with a small company, not to wage open war, but to mark the health of the forest's outer edges. They moved without banners, without heraldry, clothed in muted green and gray. The forest changed subtly as they went. Birdsong grew sparse. Where once thrush and lark had answered twilight with layered melody, now there were pauses, long, uneasy intervals, broken only by the dry rustle of leaves disturbed by unseen things. The very light altered, though the sky above remained clear. The canopy grew denser, and the air beneath it took on a greenish dimness. Trunks rose like pillars in a hall not built for welcome. Vines clung tighter to bark. The scent of pine gave way to something faintly bitter, as of damp earth left too long undisturbed. They passed through a glade where once flowers had bloomed in late summer. Now the clearing lay empty. The grass had withered in uneven patches. At its center stood a great oak, its leaves darkened and curled, though the season was not yet cold. Upon its lower branches hung remnants of webbing, thick and layered. No spider showed itself, yet the silence there felt intent. Legolas dismounted and walked forward, alone, placing his palm upon the oak's bark. It was cool beneath his touch, not with the coolness of evening, but with a deeper chill. He closed his eyes. To the Eldar, the world is not divided cleanly between sight and unseen. There are currents beneath visible form, tremors in leaf and root that speak of imbalance. He felt there a strain, like a harp string drawn too tight. Not death, not yet, but distress. He withdrew his hand slowly. The company did not linger. They marked the place in memory and moved onward. Further south still, they came upon a narrow stream branching from the forest river. Its waters ran sluggishly, clouded by sediment. Along its banks lay a scattering of bones, small creatures half hidden by fallen leaves. No sign of struggle marked the earth, no clawed tracks obvious to eye. It was as though life had simply ceased where it stood. Legolas felt then, keenly than before, the presence that pressed from beyond sight. Dol Guldur lay leagues away, hidden by distance and the forest's curve. Yet its influence was not bound by stone walls. It moved in subtle currents, sowing unrest among beasts, stirring hunger in creatures that crept low to the ground. The spiders were but one expression of it. There were other things in the deep places. Shades glimpsed between trunks, whispers carried on windless air, faint lights that flickered and were gone when approached. The wardens did not pursue such lights recklessly. The woodland realm was not strong enough in those days to challenge the hill openly. Thranduil remembered too well the cost of open moor. His people endured by watchfulness and measured resistance. So they cut webs where they found them. They hunted spiders that strayed too far north. They guarded the river crossings. They did not seek glory. They sought preservation. One night, as they camped beneath a stand of firs whose branches reached low to earth, Legolas woke without knowing why. The forest lay silent. Not the natural quiet of deep hours, but a pause that seemed to listen back. He rose without sound and moved to the edge of their small encampment. Through a gap in the trees, he saw it. Far off, a faint glow against the southern sky. It pulsed once, dimly red, then faded. No flame rose, no smoke drifted. Yet the glow had been there. He knew then that the shadow was not idle. It gathered strength. Behind stone walls and dark towers, the necromancer's power grew, though his true name was not yet openly spoken in Mirkwood's halls. Legolas did not wake the others. There was nothing to strike, no enemy at bowshot range. Instead, he stood and watched until the sky returned to uniform dark. In that stillness, he felt something shift within himself. Training had taught him skill. The river had taught him patience. Now the southern reaches taught him vigilance beyond comfort. For the forest he loved was not untouched by time's decay. It was contested ground. In years to come, the White Council would move against Dol Guldur, and the necromancer would depart for a time. Yet even then the forest would not wholly heal. Its name would remain Mirkwood long after the shadow first touched it. But in those earlier years, Legolas learned what it meant to guard beauty without illusion. The forest was fair, and it was wounded. He returned north with his company at last, passing gradually into lighter air where birds again dared to sing. Lanterns glowed in hidden halls. Water flowed clear in underground channels. Yet he carried with him the memory of dim glades and twisted webs. He understood then that his life would not be one of sheltered prince alone. He was heir not only to Thranduil's crown, but to his burden. And though the shadow lengthened in the south, it would find in the north a realm not asleep, but watchful. For so long as leaves stirred and river ran, the woodland realm would endure. There came a season when Legolas walked alone to the farthest bounds his father permitted. The patrol had turned north at twilight, satisfied that no immediate threat pressed beyond the webs they had cut and the tracks they had marked. Yet Legolas lingered, drawn by a feeling he could neither name nor wholly dismiss. The forest changed perceptibly where he stood. Behind him lay the northern wood, still fair, still bright in memory, even beneath the growing name of Mirkwood. Before him stretched deeper shadow, where the canopy thickened and the ground dipped toward hollows seldom touched by sun. He did not step fully into that darker reach. Instead, he stood upon a slight rise, where the trees thinned just enough to permit a narrow view southward. The air was heavy, not with scent alone, but with pressure, as though the forest itself bore weight upon its branches. No wind moved. Leaves hung motionless. Even insects seemed absent from that borderland. Legolas rested one hand upon the trunk of a beech and gazed into the dimness. In the distance, beyond layers of bark and leaf, He sensed rather than saw the direction of Dol Guldur. It lay hidden by leagues of wood, yet its presence was as real as stone. A place where shadow had gathered and thickened over long years. A place where will opposed the natural order of root and rain. He had heard the whispers in his father's halls, of a necromancer dwelling there, of dark arts stirring the southern glades, of beasts twisted by fear and hunger. But hearing and standing are not the same. Now, alone upon that rise, he felt the contrast more sharply than ever before. Behind him, lanterns glowed beneath the earth. Ahead, darkness pressed like an unseen tide. He did not tremble. The Eldar do not fear as men fear, yet neither are they blind to peril. He perceived in that stillness something vast, not merely the hill and its dark tower, but the wider unfolding of Middle-earth itself. Beyond Mirkwood lay the long lake and the settlements of men. Beyond them, the lonely mountain, where dwarves remembered ancient wrongs. Further still lay realms he had never seen. Imladris hidden in its valley, Lothlorien beneath golden leaves, and far to the west, the sea whose call he did not yet understand. The world was wider than the forest, and yet here at its edge, all that width seemed to gather into a single tension. The shadow in the south was not isolated. It was part of a greater stirring, a movement that would in time draw elves, men, and dwarves into paths none yet foresaw. Legolas did not know the shape of that future, but he felt its approach as one feels distant thunder through stone. He walked a few paces forward, stopping where the ground dipped into deeper shade. There, upon the forest floor, lay an old branch, snapped and blackened. Its bark had not rotted naturally. It bore marks of decay too swift for season. Around it the grass had thinned, and a faint film of web clung between nearby shrubs. He crouched and touched the earth. Cold, though the night was mild. He closed his eyes briefly. In the silence he listened, not only to the forest, but to himself. What was his place in the turning of these ages? He is prince of a woodland realm, heir to Thranduil's guarded halls. He was warden of trees and river. His arrows flew true, his steps left little trace. Yet beyond this border, events gathered that would not be contained by careful patrol alone. The necromancer's presence, though hidden, had already altered the forest's name and nature. What further changes would come? What songs would fall silent? What leaves would wither untimely? The beach beneath his hand seemed steady still. Life endured here, but endurance required watchfulness. A faint breeze stirred at last, passing through branches overhead. It did not come from the south, but from the north, cool and clean. It brushed his hair lightly and moved on. He turned then and looked back. Through layers of trunk and leaf, he glimpsed the faintest glow, not lantern light directly, but the reflected warmth of it. The woodland realm lay unseen yet present, like a hearth behind a closed door. He understood something then. The forest's edge was not merely a boundary between light and dark. It was a meeting place, a threshold. He could not banish the shadow by standing there alone, nor could he ignore it, but he could witness it. He could remember what the forest had been and what it still might become. He rose and unstrung his bow, though he kept it close. The night deepened. Far off, perhaps only imagined, there came a sound. Not quite wind, not quite voice. A murmur that faded as soon as it was heard. Legolas did not pursue it. some things are not hunted in haste. Instead, he remained a while longer, watching until stars began to appear faintly through narrow gaps above. Their light, though distant, was clear. He felt then the long span of his life stretching before him, not as burden, but as a road that would one day lead him far beyond Mirkwood's bounds. But not yet. For now, his place was here, between lantern and shadow, between memory and change. At length, he turned and made his way northward. The air grew lighter with each step. Birds, unsettled earlier, resumed their faint calls. The forest floor felt less burdened beneath his tread. When at last he passed into the safer reaches, he paused once more and looked back. The southern darkness remained, but it had not advanced that night, and so long as the woodland realm stood watch, it would not go unanswered. He returned to the hidden halls before dawn, bearing no trophy and speaking no tale. Yet within him something had settled, a quiet understanding that the world beyond the trees was stirring, and that his own path, though rooted in Mirkwood, would not forever remain within its shade. For even in the deepest forest, destiny moves like the slow wind through leaves. There were nights in Mirkwood when the shadow seemed far away, not gone, for it did not depart so easily, but distant enough that the forest could remember itself. On such nights, the air grew clear and cool, and the canopy parted in scattered openings where ancient storms had once torn branches free. Through those high windows, the stars shone unhindered, cold and bright, above the dark sea of leaves. Legolas loved those clear hours. After patroller council, when lanterns dimmed in the halls below and the last notes of harp song faded into quiet, he would climb alone into the high boughs of an oak that rose taller than most. Its trunk was broad and steady, bark furrowed deep with age. Its branches stretched outward in vast arms, reaching beyond neighboring trees to catch the cleanest light. He ascended without effort. Among the Eldar, the climbing of trees is not labor, but return. His hands found holds, worn smooth by centuries of use. His feet moved lightly along limbs thick as roadways. At last, he reached a place where he could sit astride a branch that curved gently upward, cradled between leaves and sky. There he would rest. Below him, the forest spread in layered shadow. Lanterns glowed faintly where the woodland realm lay hidden beneath roots. Further south, the darkness thickened into deeper black, concealing what lay beyond sight. Above, the heavens opened. The stars burned in their ancient courses, unmarred by the dimming of greenwood or the shadow of Dol Guldur. Varda's jewels shone with the same clarity they had held since the first awakening of the elves beside the waters of Cuivianen. Legolas gazed upward, long and without restlessness. To the firstborn, starlight is not merely distant fire, it is memory. Though he had not himself stood beneath the first stars of the world's youth, their light stirred something deep within him, a recognition older than his own life, carried in the blood of his people. He traced familiar patterns across the sky. Menelvagor, the swordsman, shone bright in the south. The sickle of the Valar gleamed high. Faint clusters shimmered beyond counting. The forest beneath him felt small in those moments, not diminished, but encompassed, for the sky arched equally over Mirkwood and over distant lands he had never seen, over Imladris in its hidden valley, over the white mountains far to the south, over the wide sea that lay beyond mortal kingdoms. The sea. He had never stood upon its shores. He had heard no gull cry, yet in rare moments such as this, when the wind shifted and the stars burned with piercing clarity, there came to him a subtle stirring, faint as a distant echo. It was not longing, not yet. It was awareness, an understanding that the world was broader than forest and hill, and that beyond the eastern woods and western plains lay waters older than sorrow. The breeze that night moved gently from the west. It carried only the scent of pine and cold air, yet something in its touch felt different. He closed his eyes briefly and listened. Far below, an owl called. A deer stepped cautiously through brush. The river murmured in its patient course, and beneath those nearer sounds there lay a deeper silence, not empty, but vast. He felt no urge to depart. The woodland realm was his home, its trees his companions, its halls his inheritance. His father's crown rested secure in northern glades. His bow guarded living branches from creeping web and dark intent. Yet the stars whispered of journeys, not of flight from duty, but of roads unwound across leagues uncounted. He thought then of the tales told by older elves who had once wandered far beyond the forest's bounds. Some had seen the sea in their youth before returning eastward. Their voices, when they spoke of it, grew distant, as if hearing a sound beyond the hearing of others. He had listened without fully understanding. Now, beneath the wheeling sky, he sensed the faintest thread connecting him to that unseen shore. It did not pull, it waited. Time to the elder does not press, it unfolds. Leaves would fall and grow again many times before that thread would strengthen. Wars would rise and pass. The necromancer would depart and return in darker form. Fellowship would be forged in distant lands. All these things lay far ahead. For now, he remained seated upon the high branch, content in stillness. Clouds drifted slowly across the sky, thin veils passing before brighter stars and moving on. The wind shifted once more, brushing leaves into soft motion. Legolas opened his eyes and lowered his gaze. The forest lay vast and shadowed, yet alive. Lantern light flickered warmly beneath roots. Patrol horns sounded faint and far, answering one another across distance in quiet reassurance. The southern darkness remained at its edge, but it did not reach this high place. He felt in that moment the balance of his life, brooded and yet aware of horizon, guardian and yet wanderer in potential, immortal and yet part of a world that changed. He remained until the moon dipped lower and the stars grew paler before approaching dawn. Then, with slow and measured motion, he descended. The bark felt cool beneath his palms. Leaves brushed softly against his shoulders. The ground received him without sound. He paused once more at the base of the oak and looked upward. The stars were fading, but their light had not diminished. It had merely yielded to morning. So too, he knew, would certain longings sleep until their appointed hour. For now, the woodland realm endured. The trees still stood, the river still sang, and beneath the ancient stars, Legolas, son of Thranduil, kept quiet watch, not only over forest and shadow, but over the untraveled road that lay far beyond the leaves. It was in the waning of summer, when the leaves had not yet turned but carried a subtle dullness at their edges, that Legolas ventured again toward the deeper south. He did not go alone at first. 2 wardens accompanied him as far as the last safe marker. The stone half-sunken earth, carved long ago, with a sign known only to the woodland guard. There they halted. Beyond that point, the forest altered more swiftly. The air grew close. The ground dipped into a shallow basin where light struggled to descend. Trunks leaned inward, as though conferring in secret. The canopy above wove so tightly that even at midday the glade lay dim. Legolas passed beyond the marker alone. It was not recklessness. It was understanding. There are moments in a guardian's life when knowledge must be taken in silence, without the distraction of others' breath or step. He moved carefully, each foot placed with deliberate ease. His bow rested unstrung in his hand, not as a sign of ease, but as a sign of restraint. The forest here felt older than elsewhere, not in age of tree, but in weight of memory. No bird sang, no insect hummed. Even the wind seemed reluctant to enter. He came at last into a glade unlike the others. It was circular and unnaturally clear, as though something had long prevented growth at its center. The earth there was dark and bare, not from trampling, but from absence. Around the rim stood trees, twisted slightly inward, their bark streaked faintly, as if brushed by smoke long past. And the glade's heart lay a shallow depression, not a pit dug by claw, not a mark of fallen trunk. It seemed instead as if the ground itself had sunk inward, drawn down by unseen force. Legolas stopped at the edge. He felt it at once. A presence, not visible, not shaped, but aware. The sensation did not strike like sudden blow. It pressed gradually, like cold seeping through cloth. His breath slowed. He did not draw arrow. He did not retreat. Instead, he stood. In that stillness, he perceived how the glade differed from mere corruption of spider or beast. The webs he had cut before bore hunger and instinct. This was deeper. It was watchfulness, a probing of the forest's heart. Somewhere far beyond sight, within the dark towers of Dol Guldur, a will had reached outward. Not in full strength, but in testing. The glade felt like a finger laid upon a pulse. He closed his eyes briefly, not in surrender, but in listening. The trees at the glade's rim strained faintly, not bending physically, but in spirit. Their roots lay in soil that remembered sunlight and rain. Yet here that memory thinned. Legolas placed one hand upon the trunk nearest him. The bark felt colder than it should, yet beneath that chill, he sensed life still, resilient, waiting. He understood then that this was not a place of final ruin. It was a wound, and wounds, though grievous, may heal if tended. The presence deepened. Not enough to speak, not enough to shape into form, but enough to test his resolve. He opened his eyes and looked toward the southern darkness. Though Dol Guldur lay many leagues distant, he felt in that moment as though the hill itself regarded him. He was not deceived into thinking himself unseen. The shadow knew of the woodland realm. It knew of Thranduil's guarded halls. It knew that the north did not lie wholly undefended. He stood very still. No boast rose to his lips. No challenge formed. The Geldar do not shout into darkness lightly. Instead, he remained as tree remains through storm, unbent, present. The pressure lingered. Then, gradually, it eased, not withdrawn, but redirected, like a tide that tests the shore and finds rock rather than sand. A faint sound stirred at last, a dry crackle from the edge of the glade. A spider emerged from shadow, larger than most that strayed north. Its eyes gleamed faintly, catching dim light from above. It hesitated upon sensing him. Legolas drew his bow in one smooth motion. The arrow flew without haste, without anger. It struck true. The creature fell and lay still. Silence returned, yet the deeper presence had already receded. He remained for several breaths more, ensuring no further movement stirred. The glade felt different now, not healed, but less taut. He knelt at the edge of the shallow depression and pressed his palm against the earth. It was cold still, but no longer pressing. He knew then that such places would multiply in time. The forest would not remain untouched by Dol Guldur will, but neither would it yield without witness. He rose and stepped backward from the glade, careful not to turn his back entirely until distance placed trunks between him and the hollow. The forest slowly resumed faint signs of life. A small bird called tentatively from beyond. Leaves stirred lightly as wind dared return. By the time he reached the marker stone, the oppressive stillness had faded into the ordinary hush of deep woods. The wardens waited without question. They saw in his eyes that something had been found. Not treasure, not foe to boast of, but knowledge. They returned north as twilight descended. Lanterns glowed faintly beneath roots. Water flowed in quiet channels. The halls remained warm and untroubled. Yet within Legolas, there lay a new understanding. The shadow did not merely creep blindly. It searched. It measured resistance. And in that glade he had felt the first true gaze of something older and more cunning than spider or wolf. He did not speak of it widely. Some knowledge is not strengthened by many tongues, but he carried it with him as one carries a scar unseen beneath garment. The forest was beautiful. The forest was wounded, and the forest was contested ground. Yet so long as guardians walked its paths and stood unflinching at its edges, it would not fall into silence unopposed. Thus, beneath dim boughs and watchful stars, the son of Thranduil learned that darkness does not always roar. Sometimes it listens, and so must those who would stand against it. In the long years that followed, the forest endured. The shadow did not vanish, nor did it wholly consume the woodland realm. It lingered in the south, withdrew at times and gathered again. Spiders multiplied and were hunted. Dark shapes passed between trunks and were marked, watched, and driven back. Rumors moved quietly through hidden halls, of councils held far away, of powers rising beyond the forest sight. Yet in the north, beneath the guarded branches of ancient oaks, life continued. Lanterns glowed in caverns carved beneath roots. Water flowed in silver channels. Songs rose in patient harmony, neither defiant nor despairing but steadfast. And Legolas grew, not swiftly, for the Eldar did not ripen in haste, but steadily. His bow became an extension of his will, its string answering his touch as river answers gravity. His step left no sound upon leaf or stone. The wardens looked to him not merely as prince, but as captain indeed, if not yet in name. He ranged further than before, to the eastern eaves, where the forest thinned toward distant plains, to the western borders, where rumor sometimes brought tidings of wandering dwarves, where men seeking cautious trade. He stood beside his father in quiet council, hearing reports from scouts and weighing news carried by messengers who came seldom but with purpose. Through it all, the forest remained his anchor. He knew each river bend where reeds bent low in autumn wind. He knew which glades bloomed earliest in spring, and which remained dim even in high summer. He knew the sound of spider silk torn by arrowhead and the different silence that followed when a deeper presence withdrew. The wound in the southern glade did not heal swiftly, but neither did it spread unchecked. Years passed. The White Council at last moved openly against the necromancer, and Dol Guldur's shadow lessened for a time. The forest breathed easier then. Birds returned tentatively to southern branches. The air grew clearer in places long dim. Yet even in that reprieve, Legolas felt that the world beyond Mirkwood was stirring in ways not bound to a single hill or tower. Messengers from Imladris spoke of growing unrest in distant lands. Whispers told of a dark lord, not wholly vanquished, gathering strength beyond the knowledge of many. Legolas listened. He did not yet ride forth. His place remained among trees and flowing water, but the sense he had felt beneath the stars, that faint thread leading westward, outward, stirred more often. On certain nights, he would again climb the high oak and gaze beyond the forest's crown. The stars remained unchanged, wheeling in ancient courses. Yet he perceived beneath their constancy the shifting of mortal realms. Men rose and fell in their kingdoms. Dwarves reclaimed halls long lost and lost them again. Even among the Eldar, departures increased. Some left quietly for the Grey Havens, answering a call deeper than speech. He felt that call distantly. It did not yet claim him. Instead, another path began to shape itself in quiet possibility. He did not foresee a council in Rivendell. He did not imagine standing beside a dwarf of Erebor, nor walking the long leagues of the south. He did not yet know the names of Aragorn, son of Arathorn, or Mithrandir's full designs. But he sensed that the forest's fate was not separate from the wider fate of Middle-earth. The shadow that had once pressed upon a single glade would in time stretch across fields and mountains, and when that hour came, the woodland realm would not stand apart. One evening, as golden light faded from the upper leaves and twilight deepened between trunks, Legolas walked once more to the forest's southern edge. The glade he had found years before lay quieter now. Grass had begun to return at its rim. The trees stood straighter. The earth no longer felt drawn downward by unseen hand. He stood there in stillness. The forest was not healed completely, but it endured. He placed his hand upon the beech trunk, as he had done before, and felt life strong within it. Then he turned northward, not in retreat, but in acknowledgement. His path for now remained among these trees, yet beyond them lay roads he would one day walk. Roads that would carry him through snow and shadow, across the plains of Rohan and into the heart of war. Roads that would bind him to companions unlike any he had known. Roads that would lead him at last to the sea he had only sensed beneath starlight. All that lay ahead. For now, the forest breathed. Lanterns glowed beneath root and stone. Thranduil's halls stood firm against time and rumor alike. And Legolas, son of the Elven King, moved quietly between shadow and light. Guardian of the woodland realm, watcher beneath ancient stars, and bearer of a destiny not yet revealed. The leaves stirred softly in the evening wind. The river murmured on its patient course. And far above, the stars kept their silent vigil over forest and future alike. If this gentle journey through Mirkwood brought you peace tonight, consider liking the video and subscribing for more calm tales from Middle-earth.